In Calcutta, there were thousands of dead bodies on the pavement, dead from malnutrition. A truck used to drive down there and throw them into the truck. The sides of the truck were about 2 to 3 metres high. It was an awful sight with the flies on the bodies. If you've ever smelt mass decomposing bodies, it's a smell you'll never forget. They won't take English bread or even bully beef. We drove through in trucks. You could tell the transport officers where you're going. They would ring up and provide transport. We went to Allahabad by train. Then we went from truck to Bamroli. There was a big Air Force maintenance unit there. Planes fly in, new engines, etc. We got there, they didn't know what to do with us. So we dug a gun emplacement with a 1914 Lewis gun. We used to sit and man the gun until it got too hot. At first, most of the lads got dysentery. Don't know how, but we spent the first 4 to 5 days running backwards and forwards. We were given M&B tablets. No one died from that. Some Indian Army personnel thought they got smallpox, so they were fenced off in their own tents for quarantine. We were supposed to guard them. One of our lads guarding them was dark-skinned. They thought he was one of the Indians, so they picked him up and they thought he was escaping. When the RAF doctors inspected them, they said they've got chickenpox. All of a sudden, 3 trucks load of Yanks came and pitched a tent. The next day, a Flying Fortress B-17 flew in. The Yanks got out Coca-Cola and ice cream machines. They had generators and were all self-contained. They were loading the plane with sandbags. They were testing it for atmospheric conditions in India. It was 129 degrees in the hospital veranda and 136 degrees on the runway. They sent us to the Himalayas for a holiday by train to Chakotra. The PCI corporal that was at Great Yarmouth was there. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I've been sick." I asked him about Jonesy, his mate. He said he got married and he had to take his place. We would sit on the mountain at night, watch the lightning follow the stream way below us. It was an amazing thing to watch. We set off early one morning, down the valley and up a hill. From there, we could see Mount Everest and Kachchinga. The guide said we were lucky to see it on a very clear day. I'm thinking that this picture is wrong. I cited where he was, where Mount Everest was. That's the picture. And this is where he was. And the furthest thing you can see is 1/6 the way to Mount Everest. I'm thinking there's no way you could see Mount Everest from there. Anyway, there was a Church of Scotland up there. Don't know the history, but it was strange to see it there. There were white-faced monkeys that jumped all over it. We played soccer up there, and I read a book called Saint of New York while I was there. The guys all got a raise in pay from AC2 to AC1 back in Allahabad. It was the end of June. So this is the only photo I have of my father in Burma. A Blenheim bomber was at the station. I think it was the last in Southeast Asia. A lad at the station and test pilot flew it. The lad could fly, but was colourblind, so not fly officially. They both flew the bomber, and when it landed, the wheels wouldn't go down and it crashed. It was my 21st birthday at Allahabad, 21st of June 1942. They wouldn't let us go out of camp because Gandhi was making trouble. Just after the festival, where they bathe in the Ganges, we were allowed out. Shortly after my 21st birthday, some pay arrived, the first pay since being in service. We all went down to Allahabad. It was the 21st of June 1942. They wouldn't let us go out of the camp as Gandhi was making trouble. Just after the festival where they bathed in the Ganges, were allowed out. We all went to a restaurant. They sold spirits and we were drinking gin and lime juice. Taffy Evans, who plays goalie, suddenly was missing. We were drunk at this stage. We said, "Where is he?" Someone saw him go out a few doors and down the street. He dropped his pants and was doing up on the street. We couldn't believe it. We fixed him up and dragged him in. Someone said, "Let's go to the brothel." How do we get there? By cab. That was a carriage with one horse. So off we went with 8 lads on the back and a guy with the horseman. The man with the driver got impatient, grabbed the whip, whipped the horse. The horse took off round a corner and tipped everyone over. That was the end of the trip to the brothel. Back to the restaurant. Then the MP came round and said, "Time to go back to camp, lads." And we went to the pickup point. I must have fallen asleep because the next I knew I was picked up and thrown back into the truck. On Christmas Eve, Jim Smith, guy we called Grim, on guard duty, some lads gave him a drink on the way back. The officers caught him drunk and he had to do parade at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. for a full week. We left Allahabad to Secunderabad. There was about 1,000 there and they put us into a squadron for the first time. It was to be a rearm and refuel squadron in Burma. It didn't really work out that way. So this was Squadron 2943. Squadron leader Riles, Rocking Boots, Flight Lieutenant Edwards, they called him Arakan, and the pilot officer Reed George Spurs. So we left and went to Jazua. 2943 Squadron's very hard to find on the internet. This is all I could find. So we went to Jazua, about 80 miles north of Calcutta. There was a squadron of Wellingtons, English heavy bombers there. We spent the monsoon there and spent most of the time wet. You had your ground shit on top of you rather underneath because you wanted to stop the drips. At Jazua, everyone had rifles. The officers had pistols, the commanders had Tommy guns. They took the Tommy guns off them and gave them Sten guns instead. The army found that Tommy gun springs were no good after a while. The least bit of dirt and they jammed and we couldn't get replacement springs. They only wanted so many men to go to Burma. We ended up with 156. They eliminated them on ability. The first guy to be eliminated was a Jewish guy because he wanted the Sabbath off. They sent him to a Jewish unit. Next, everyone had to learn to drive. Anyone who didn't fast first time went to Calcutta. While there, we unloaded bombs from trains to aircraft. We were told they were being dropped in Burma, but I asked the pilot why the bombs had no detonators. He said they stopped at Dum Dum near Calcutta to refuel and install detonators, and they dropped them in Burma. I suspect they bombed Thailand as well, because the same bombs that we used at Palel and Imphal later on, they were actually ferrying them to hurricanes to bomb the Chinmen River. We would often play soccer in 3 inches of water. One day, Wellington took off. His motor stopped and he crashed down into the paddock. He was about 300 feet up and his nose just dived. They sent us to see what we could do, but all the paddock was on flames. We walked up through it. The air gunner was sitting in the turret at the back. We waved to him, telling him we would get him out. The pilot was dead. The navigator was cut in half. We turned the gun turret around and he had a bubble on his forehead the size of an egg. He was dead too. I grabbed the maps on the way out. The hard part was getting the bodies back across the swollen river. The last fortnight we were there, they ordered us to dye all of our clothing. Green, everything, hats, hankies, everything. The shorts were taken from us and we were issued with long sleeve shirts and long pants. And they issued us with putty-made cloth that wound around our ankles. We had delivered 2 3-ton trucks, 4 1,500 weights, 4 armoured cars. I never understood why, but we got 4 Harley-Davidsons with foot clutches. I wasn't interested in riding motorcycles. We put all our personal gear into a tin box. The box went to Secunderabad. When we left, we had a main pack with clothes on the side with personal items. 1 out of each flight, 4 flights in our squadron, included me, had to go to an armourer's course at Lahore in Pakistan. It was an Indian Air Force base where the English taught the Indians. We learned about different guns, ballistics. Example, I'd never primed a grenade before, never used a branding gun. Learning how to zero a rifle at 25 yards. I passed the course and got a pay rise. Left there and went back to the unit. While there, you had to learn everyone's voice, way of walking, any mannerisms so you could identify them in semi-darkness. We packed everything up and set off. Same procedure, load your gear onto the trucks and we went by train. As before, 2 stations, Hurrah and Bengal Azam. Went back up across the Burma Futura and to Dinapur, which is the beginning of the Manipur Road, Manipur Plains. We went down the Manipur Road by truck to Palel, to a village that had been half evacuated. Some tents were used as well. That was our first issue with mepicrin. We took mepicrin 1 tablet per day for malaria. They were yellow and it made the whites of your eyes yellow. I kept taking it until I ran out in February 1946. We started doing patrols with armoured cars about 5 miles down the road and back again. The patrols were towards Tidham, where the 17th Indian Division was. The Army found out we had armoured cars and took them. One of the officers, Arakan, Mr. Edwards to his face, said, "We're going into Burma tomorrow," and gave me a list of arms he wanted prepared. That seems a lot for a rearm and refuel unit. Loaded up the 3-tonner and a couple of 1500 weights and a jeep. 4 20-pound tents and a marquee. The Indian engineers had taken over a village and used their paddy fields for an airfield in the jungle. 20 of us went down there. It was Tamu. So here's a bit of a map. This is the Indian side and the Burma side border. Tamu is here. This is the U River and the big river, and the Japanese were to the right hand side of that. That was the Chinwin River. So we decided halfway down the airstrip would be an ideal place to put the tents. We cleared the trees to make way for the tents. I put up a 12-foot big tent, but the army guy said you could see it a mile away, and so we used a tarp instead. The worst of it was that we had to dig 2 foot down to put the tent in. I was supposed to be a stretcher bearer, so I got to sleep in a one-man tent with a stretcher. The creek was divided into 3 sections. One the army got drinking water from, the next was for animals, there's a lot of mules, and the last was where we could wash. Arakan took a patrol down to the U River. It was 3 miles through jungle. He used to send lads regularly down to check what was happening. The army was down there, but you never got many information from them or the reasons for all these things happening. We found the Spitfires couldn't land there because some trees at the end of the runway were too high. So Arakan got 2 army engineers to use plastic explosives and got us to stick it around the tree. They didn't do it, we did it. Then they said, "You're supposed to use gloves with that stuff, else you get a headache." I got a toothache and one guy was temporarily blinded. We just blew the trees up and that was it. It was about November 43. Then at Christmas I got hemorrhoids. I had to go back to Imphal and get them fixed. Then when I came back to Tamu, we stayed there until Mountbatton came. He landed in the DC and got all the army generals and senior officers to congregate on the airstrip. He said, "You will hold the Japanese until the monsoon starts and then withdraw to the Imphal Plains where you'll fight the Japanese and there will be no withdrawal." As if to say, you're expendable, win or lose, and that was it.